Hi everyone and welcome back to the Colour Cave where we like to play with art stuff. My name is Jem and it's time for another drawing tips for beginners video. Today we're going to be focusing on value and shading, which is one of my absolute favourite things to do with drawing. And these are just a few of the things that I've kind of learned along my arting journey to help you out. This series of videos is not meant to be a drawing course, it's just simply the things that I've found that have helped. So let's talk about value first of all, a little bit of an explanation about what that is. Value, sometimes referred to as tonal value, is generally regarded as how light or dark something is compared to black. So you have light tonal values, mid-tonal values and dark tonal values. When we talk about shading, that is the mechanical process of creating these values or tones in your image in order to make it look more realistic, to give it a little bit more depth, to make it more interesting to the eye, rather than just line work alone. So taking a look at values then, here is what is a very simple value scale from light to dark. And all I've used here is a 2B pencil. So this is a really good starting point and it refers back to the video I did way back at the beginning when we were talking about pencil pressure. It's a really good idea to practice value scales with your selected drawing implements. This lets you explore what your implement is capable of, but also what you are capable of as well. And really when we do this, we're just trying to explore and let the eye identify all the different shades that we can get from light to dark or from dark to light. So I'm going to show you again, this time I'm going to use an 8B pencil. So this is a much darker and softer pencil. So we will assume that we will be able to get a much darker value than we've got with a 2B pencil. So the way to practice this is just to take your pencil, and I actually find it easier to start at the lightest one. Some people prefer to start at the darkest one, but you can play about with that and try it yourself. But obviously our lightest value in this case is going to be the white of the paper because you don't get any lighter than the white of the paper. So in the next section down, I'm just going to tickle the paper as lightly as I can. So the pencil's hardly touching the paper, and I'm just going to make a little square there. And then I'm going to start to increase my pressure as I go down here. So we're doing fairly well so far. So you can see the difference between these values already. And as I'm coming down towards these darker values, I'm just starting to press harder. So you can see where this is going. Really dark shade. So in practicing this type of exercise, it helps you identify with what's possible when it actually comes to your drawing. Now in terms of actually being able to build up these values when we're putting it into a practical application of our drawing, the best way to build up value is in layers. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I'm very much all about the layering. So I'm just going to give you an example of that. I'm going to use this 2B pencil again. Now, I'd just like to stress it doesn't matter what grade of pencil that you've got. You just use whatever you can work with. If it's just a straight HB pencil, that's fine as well. But the best way to build up value is to use a light hand and build up some light layers. So let's say, for example, I want to get a really light value and a really dark value with this 2B pencil, and I'm going to put them side by side. So very light pressure. And I'll put that down. And then I'm going to do the same again next to it. And then I'm just going to keep going back over it. Now it can be a good idea, especially if you're using textured paper, to change the direction, you know, in which you're going. But there we go. So there's 4 light layers of pencil. And 5. 6. And so on and so forth until you get the desired value that you're looking for. So when you're doing this in your drawings, it can be really handy to have a scale like this to hand so that you've got a reference point and you can match up what you're doing. And in doing these exercises over and over, it just means we get quicker and more efficient at it, and that means it takes you less time to do your drawing. So it's all very well doing exercises and all the rest of it, and we all know it's not that exciting. How do we actually apply this practically to something that we're doing? Let's take a look at how we're going to deal with this when we have a reference photo. So here is a super cute picture of Pip when she was a tiny puppy at the vet's, and obviously she was so stressed out she fell asleep on the table. You know, vets are stressful. There's quite a lot of different values in this picture, and when you're first starting out, especially if there are a lot of elements to the picture, it can be quite difficult to pick out the values, especially if you're going to do a graphite drawing. And one of the best things I was ever given as a tip in terms of doing this, if you're struggling with values when you're using a reference photo, the best thing to do is put it into black and white. So here's the same photo in black and white, and instantly we can relate this back to any one of our value scales that we've already done. So when it comes to actually doing this picture, it's so much easier to pick out the lights and the darks. Now obviously with the colour version you can see that there's a white cupboard, and Pip also has a lot of white on her as well, and then there's the obvious things like the black of her fur, but sometimes it's the mid-tones, it's these middle areas that are more difficult to pick out. So if you do have a photograph that you want to draw from, the best advice I can give you is put a filter on it, and the filters are available on everything now. You've got them on mobile phones, you've got them in, you know, Facebook, everywhere. They're everywhere. They're easy to get a hold of, and convert that picture to black and white, and you will find it a lot easier to pick out these mid values. So just as an exercise, let's pick out a couple of the values from this picture of Pip. When we look at the colour version, we see black Pippi, white Pippi, and we see a black table as well, and we see that the vet's wearing a blue tunic. But what we have to do is dig a little bit deeper than that and try and match those up with our value scale, because those are going to be the three darkest areas of the picture. So if we look carefully and we switch to the black and white version, we can see that the black of Pip's fur is actually standing out against the table. So even if I was just to draw, you know, like a really rough representation here. So let's just pop a kind of depiction of Pip in here. Her wee head. Oh, she's such a wee sausage when she was a puppy. I don't know what happened. She's a hooligan now. And then we've got some arms and some hands here. And then we have some tunic. Obviously this is not a to scale drawing, but I'm just trying to demonstrate here for you. Okay, so the darkest areas are Pip's legs. So we'll just give that a rough outline as well. And then she's a little white bit, and then she's got the patch that comes down over her eye. So it's when we're taking into account these three darkest areas, which is the table, the patches on Pip, and also the tunic. This is where we want to work the hardest. So I'm just going to stick with this 2B pencil. And what you can see from the black and white drawing is that you can clearly see the outline of Pip's black fur against the table. So although the table is black, it is clearly not a true black, or the light that is shining on it is reflecting, making it look less dark than it actually is. So in this instance, we've established that Pip's fur is the darkest part of the picture. So what we want to do is we want to pick that off of our value scale here, and we want to work this in layers and get this fairly dark. Now you can take as much time as you need over this, and you will find that you'll go back and you will darken it down, but just as a starting point I always find it's easy to pick out the darkest shades. Now the next darkest area is actually the tunic. Although it's blue, when it comes to value it's still a darker value than the table, so we want to fill that in next. Vet's got her bare arms there, so we'll just stick that in. And then the table is lighter once again. So we know that when we shade this area, we need it to be lighter than both the tunic and the dark part of Pip's fur. And again, we can layer up the pencil, just as I was demonstrating a little minute ago. We can layer up the pencil to alter these values until they're right. So we've done a fairly good job with that there in terms of picking out the tonal values. We can clearly see the outline of Pip's black fur against the table, and with the vet's tunic is lighter than Pip's fur, but darker than the table. That's just a really quick example of how to pick out tonal values. Now I have picked out a couple of photographs that I've just quick snaps that I've taken myself, and they're available over on the Cave website in the resources section. This is the address, and I'll leave the link in the description of the video as well if you want to try these exercises out for yourself. So they're colour photographs, and I'll leave it to you to convert them to black and white and have a little go at picking out things on your value scale and see how you get on with it. So next up I want to talk a little bit about shading, and when you hear people saying the word shading, it can be interchangeable with tone or value. but it can also be the act of actually making those darker and lighter values. And the examples you will see all the time of shading is usually some sort of cube. So again, I'll just rattle up a quick cube here. Not going to be completely geometrically correct, and the other one is a sphere. So when we look at these objects, we want to make these look like 3D objects, and shading is the key to that. One of the most important things that helps us along with this is light sources. I'm going to cover that in a separate video because it's a little bit more complicated, but just thinking on the base terms here, I want you to get a feel for the type of thing that you should be doing if you're wanting to shade line art that you've done. So taking these really simple examples and assuming that the light source is coming from where our eyeballs are, then this side is going to be pretty light and this side is going to be a little bit darker. So again, thinking back to your value scales, pick a value and put it in. So we'd pick out a mid-tone and then a darker tone in the place where the light maybe isn't going to hit so much. So you can see there straight away that's making that object look much more three-dimensional, and it's the fact that it's a cube becomes much more apparent when we put in that shading. And it's the same with this circle. Right now it looks like a circle on the paper. If we add in some shading, and I'm going to go back to this example when we come to light sources, but if we pop a little bit of shading and use a little bit of a contour there as well, because it's a circular shape, and if we think about our value scale, now you can actually almost run your value scale all together and make it a gradation, you know, dark to light with this, but anything that's got a curved surface, if you just put in one of your darkest values on one side and have your lightest value on another side, you're instantly making that item look much more rounded. Now obviously you're not going to be drawing a lot of spheres like this. You're not just going to go around drawing these smooth circular objects all the time, but anything that has a little bit of a curve on it, then this is ideal. Another example I always like to use are trees, because trees are, you know, they're quite complicated and they're really good fun to draw. So even if we take just a really simple tree trunk, so let's just draw something fairly simple. Maybe there's a branch coming up off here, and there's a branch coming up off here. There we go. Okay, so imagine this is a tree trunk. By putting in some really simple shading, we can make this look much better, because it's just a couple of scribbly lines just now. So maybe I want to put some more in there. Now again, if you think about the average branch is almost cylindrical, you know, like a toilet roll tube. Very roughly, but you know, very rough shape. Like this. So when we think about that, if we think about this curved surface here, if we put a darker section and then bring that up a little bit lighter, you're instantly giving it some dimension. And we can do the same down here as well on this branch. Maybe some along here too. And we can also assume that the value of the tree is going to be darker than that of the background. So we can put in a much lighter value. So maybe somewhere from here to maybe here in this range. So again, into that mid-tone range, just to make it look a little bit more like a tree, and also for it to stand off the white of the paper as well. And if you wanted to get really fancy, you could pop in, you know, a little bit down here. So the last thing I want to talk about is how we vary our shading, because sometimes it's good to have a lot of variation and not actually stick to the rules, just to make an artwork a bit more interesting. So this can apply to anything that you wish to draw. So for example, if I was to draw something fairly simple, let's say like a jam jar is probably not the best. Yeah, okay, let's use a jam jar. Most people know what a jam jar looks like. So a fairly simple structure. There's not really a huge amount to it, so I'll just sketch this out. Or just a jar of any description, actually. It doesn't have to be a jam jar. Okay. So I've got a basic jar shape here, not completely straight, but we'll give that a pass. And yeah, okay, it looks like a jar, it looks like it's got a lid on it, but let's make our jar a bit more interesting. So if we think about the tonal value, maybe it's coloured glass, maybe it's not see-through glass, or maybe the lid's a really dark colour, maybe it's sitting on a really dark surface. Introduce some different values to your own drawing, so you're not going from a reference point here. This is about using your brain to do it. So let's make the lid of the jam jar quite dark. So if I pop down quite a dark shade there, and maybe a bit more of a mid-tone on the top there, Let's make that line a bit more defined. There we go. Instantly the jar looks a little bit more interesting. And maybe down the bottom here, maybe it is quite transparent, so we're able to see this back part of the jar a little bit. So technically there's going to be 2 layers of glass there, so that could have a mid-tone shade in there, like so. And then maybe we can just add in a little bit of shade in here. Now we all know what the shine off of glass looks like. Maybe it's shining on this side, but if we add in a little bit of shading here, and maybe even a little bit round underneath the, you know, where the lid is. Use these mid-tones, and you can even bring that across a little bit. So this is where it's good to get creative, but straight away that looks like a much more interesting jar, and literally all we've done is scribbled down a couple of lines. However, what I did do was think about my value scale. So if we look at it in reverse now, I've got this value here, which is quite dark, and at this corner I've got a slightly lighter version of that over here. I've got this one up here, which looks something like this. And this is probably a little bit lighter, in this section here is probably a little bit lighter than that. And I've also got the white of the paper, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different values really quickly. But this is what's going to give you the interest and a little bit of complexity to your drawings as well. So I encourage you to have a go at these things, try value scales. They're really handy when you're starting out, and they're really useful if you're working from a reference photo. I also encourage you to try some of the black and white value studies using the photos that I've provided for you on the website, and really try and take the guesswork out of figuring out your darks and your lights. I also encourage you to just shade things for fun like this, but use your full range of tonal values if and when you can, and it will make for a much more interesting picture and help you along your way on your sketching journey. So that's it for today, guys. I hope you have found these tips helpful, and I'll see you back in the cave really soon for another video. Have a good day, everyone. Bye bye for now.